What if I told you that the biggest mistake we make about psychopaths is believing that can we recognize them? I'm not talking about serial killers. I'm not talking about monsters printed on newspapers. I'm talking about people who wake up early, work, pay bills, smile to neighbors, and are never discovered. Maybe you've already lived with one. Maybe he still lives. The image we build about psychopathy was shaped by cinema. Cold eyes, strange behavior, explicit violence. But the reality is quieter, more organized, more functional. The real psychopath doesn't seem broken. He looks competent, controlled, trusting. He understands social rules. He just doesn't feel what you feel. Psychopathy is a personality disorder marked by a lack of empathy, coldness, emotional, and tendency to manipulation. But there is one detail that is rarely discussed. Many psychopaths are not criminals. They are adapted, learned to wear a mask, social with perfection, and that's what makes them invisible. Research in behavioral psychology shows that psychopathic traits can be distributed at different levels in the population. Some individuals present enough characteristics to cause profound damage without ever crossing the line of illegality. They don't need to kill to destroy. They can destroy reputations, careers, relationships, trusts, and they do this without changing their tone of voice. There's something deeply unsettling about this idea. The modern predator doesn't run. He calculates, observe, learn your emotional patterns, discover your weaknesses, and use this with surgical precision. But you never realize the exact moment you started being manipulated. Because he doesn't scream. He agrees. It validates. He listens. Until, little by little, you start to doubt yourself. Functional psychopaths have a high level of emotional control. Unlike most people, they are not dominated by guilt or fear of rejection. This gives them a competitive advantage in high-pressure environments, business, policy, leadership positions. They can make cool decisions when everyone else hesitates, and they are admired for it. But behind the efficiency, there is an emotional void that cannot be seen, only felt by those who come too close. Maybe you've already felt this. That strange feeling that something is slightly wrong, even when everything looks perfect. A smile that doesn't reach the eyes, an emotional reaction that seems rehearsed, an apology that carries no real regret. If you've ever felt like someone seemed too normal, maybe this video will help you understand why. Why? Because the problem was never appearance. The problem is that we learn to look for danger in the wrong place. We fear the aggressive, the explosive, the unstable, but we ignore the excessively calm, the strategically kind, the one who never loses control. The real question is not whether psychopaths exist. The question is, how many of them have learned to live perfectly among us? How do they develop such a convincing mask? And even more disturbing, if they don't feel guilt, fear, or empathy the same way we do, what really matters to them? Motivates? In the next block, we will dismantle the biggest myth about psychopaths. And maybe that will change completely the way you see the people around you. For decades, we have been taught to recognize evil by appearance. Empty eyes, rigid expression, strange behavior, impulsive violence. But real psychopathy rarely manifests like this. The biggest collective mistake is believing that psychopaths are easily identifiable. The truth is uncomfortable. Many of them are socially skilled, articulate, and even charismatic. They understand how people work. Observe emotional patterns with coldness of a scientist studying behavior. And they learn quickly. Psychopathy is not synonymous with madness. It does not involve delusions or loss of contact with the reality. On the contrary, psychopaths are usually fully aware of what they are doing. They know how to distinguish right and wrong. They just don't feel the emotional weight of that distinction. This difference is crucial. While most people avoid hurting others out of guilt, empathy, or fear of causing pain, the psychopath evaluates only practical consequences. If there is no direct risk to him, the moral brake is simply not activated. This creates a specific type of individual, the functional social predator. He doesn't need to commit violent crimes. It operates in gray areas, uses manipulation, psychological, distortion of facts, calculated promises. You can lie by looking directly in your eyes. No change in your heartbeat. Neuroscience studies show that areas of the brain associated with empathy and emotional processing presents reduced functioning in individuals with high psychopathic traits S. This does not mean a total absence of emotion. It means absence of emotional resonance. They understand how you feel, but they don't feel with you. This difference creates a dangerous advantage. Imagine playing chess against someone who doesn't experience anxiety, guilt, or attachment. Someone who makes decisions purely strategic, even when these decisions involve people. In competitive corporate environments, this profile can thrive. Coolness under pressure is seen as leadership. Emotional detachment is interpreted as professionalism. Ability to fire someone without hesitation is called efficiency. And so, traits that would be alarming in an intimate context become admired in power environments. But there is a disturbing detail. Functional psychopaths rarely show their real face. At the beginning, they start out charming. Pay attention. Interested. They create quick and intense connections. They make you feel like you are special, single, chosen. This is not passion. It's mapping. They collect emotional information like those who collect strategic data. Find out your insecurities, your dreams, your fears, and they store everything. Not to care, but to use if necessary. You can work for years alongside someone like this without realizing it. He laughs in meetings, participate in get-togethers, meet goals, receives compliments. But behind the scenes, it builds narratives, isolates people, distorts conflicts, creates small, invisible tensions that weaken others while strengthening your own position. And when confronted, he reacts with absolute calm. This calm disarms, because we are used to associating guilt with nervousness. But the psychopath doesn't enter panicked when accused. It adjusts the story, reformulate the facts, reverse roles. Suddenly, you're the one who seems exaggerated. This is the difference between a movie villain and a real psychopath. The villain threatens, the real convinces. And perhaps the most disturbing aspect is this. Many psychopaths know they are different. They realize early on that they don't feel like others. Then they learn to imitate. They observe emotional reactions and reproduce appropriate facial expressions. Develop a rehearsed social repertoire. The mask is not improvised. It is built over years. This explains why friends and colleagues often say the same phrase after revelation of destructive behavior. I never would have guessed. Because you weren't trained to imagine. We were taught to distrust the aggressive, not the charming. But here a deeper question arises. If they don't feel genuine empathy, how can you maintain stable relationships for so long? The answer is in control. Psychopaths value stability when it is useful. A marriage can offer status. A position can offer power. A friendship can offer access. They do not maintain bonds for emotional connection. Maintain for functionality, and as long as everything is working in their favor, there is no reason to break up. What happens when something threatens this structure? What happens when you notice inconsistencies? When do you start questioning contradictory versions? When do you feel that subtle intuition that something doesn't fit? In the next block, we will explore the invisible engineering of psychopathic manipulation, and perhaps you will recognize patterns that have always been before your eyes. Psychopathic manipulation does not begin with lying. It starts with connection. They know that no one trusts anyone who seems dangerous. Then they do the opposite. They become pleasant, helpful, interested, create a feeling of affinity instant. You feel like you've finally found someone who understands you, but it is not understanding. It's behavioral reading. Psychopaths have a high capacity to observe micro-expressions, changes in tone of voice, and emotional patterns. They notice when you seek approval, when you need validation, when you fear rejection, and they adjust their posture accordingly. This is called mirroring. They repeat their opinions. They share similar tastes, agree with your values. They create an illusion of perfect tune. And this harmony generates trust. Trust generates openness. And opening provides material, emotional stuff, intimate information, stories that reveal their weaknesses. At first, nothing seems wrong. On the contrary, it looks intense, different, rare. It's exactly this intensity that captivates. Functional psychopaths understand that human relationships are driven by emotion, so offer concentrated emotion, exclusive attention, precise praise, promises surroundings, but everything is calculated. When the conquest phase ends, the pattern changes. Subtly, small criticisms begin to emerge, almost imperceptible comments about your competence, appearance, or memory. Nothing serious enough for direct confrontation, just enough to plant doubt. This process is known as psychological erosion. You start to question your own perceptions. Am I exaggerating? Maybe I misunderstood. Meanwhile, he remains calm, safe, rational. This contrast generates internal confusion, and confusion increases dependence. One of the most used mechanisms is gaslighting. The psychopath denies obvious facts with absolute conviction. Rewrite events, reverse roles. If you confront him, he reacts with controlled surprise. I would never do that. You're imagining things. It's been very sensitive lately. No explosions, no explicit aggression, just constant distortion. Over time, your inner confidence weakens, and when you lose your own emotional reference, it becomes your main source of validation. This is where control is consolidated. From a neurological point of view, the absence of guilt allows the psychopath to maintain cold coherence even when manipulating. He does not suffer internal conflict. There is no moral tension to be managed. For him, it's strategy. For you, it is fragmented reality. If something here starts to make sense to you, stick with it until the end. What's next? It can change the way you observe people, because the next level of manipulation is even quieter. Functional psychopaths don't just control individuals, they control narratives. In the workplace, for example, they may praise a colleague in public while subtly undermine your reputation in private conversations. Create alternative versions of facts before any conflict becomes visible. When the situation explodes, they have already built social alibis. You seem unstable, they seem reasonable. This ability comes from a central characteristic: strategic reading of context. They evaluate hierarchies, alliances, points of influence. They know who needs to impress, who can discard, who should isolate. Nothing is improvised. Even emotional displays can be simulated. Sadness, indignation, performative empathy. They observe how people express pain and reproduce the appropriate pattern. No because they feel, but because they know that feeling is expected. This creates the ultimate illusion: authenticity. Perhaps most disturbingly, many psychopaths believe they are just being more intelligent. For them, excessive emotion is weakness. Attachment is vulnerability. Guilt, it's a waste of energy. They see themselves as pragmatists, rational, superiors, and while you try to resolve conflicts honestly, they are already 3 moves away. Front. But is there a limit to this mask? Do they feel something genuine at some point? Or do they live permanently in this cold architecture of control? In the next block, we will move away from theory and into real, everyday life. Let's analyze how this dynamic manifests itself at work, in the family, in intimate relationships. And for that, so many victims live with a psychopath for years without realizing it. And perhaps as you recognize these patterns, you will begin to revisit memories that you always remember. They just seemed strange. Could that admired leadership hide something more? Was that intense relationship a connection or a calculation? And most importantly, if you came across a functional psychopath today, would you be sure you would notice? It's easy to study psychopathy when it's distant, in books, in documentaries, in criminal cases. The real discomfort begins when we realize that she might be sitting next to us every day. At work, functional psychopaths tend to stand out quickly. He understands hierarchy, knows how to impress superiors, and identifies weaknesses in the team. Watch who seeks recognition, who fears confrontation, who avoids conflict, and use it. Don't raise your voice. Don't lose control. On the contrary, it is often seen as the most balanced room. While colleagues become emotionally involved in arguments, he maintains a firm and rational stance. This rationality looks like maturity, but it could be a lack of empathy. Corporate psychopaths tend to take calculated risks without considering the impact human. They fire without hesitation, transfer responsibilities when necessary. They know how to attribute faults to others without leaving direct traces, create strategic alliances, and they discard people when they stop being useful. In the professional environment, this is often confused with healthy ambition, but there is a subtle pattern. Where they pass, there is emotional exhaustion, divided teams, unresolved conflicts, constant feeling of invisible tension, and, interestingly, they are almost never held accountable, because they know how to position themselves as a solution. In the family, the dynamics are even more complex. The functional psychopath may assume the role of ideal partner in the early years. Attentive, gift, protector, builds a solid image in front of friends and relatives. But at home, the narrative can be different. Subtle financial control, constant devaluation disguised as concern, progressive friend isolation, criticism masquerading as advice. The partner begins to adapt to avoid conflicts, adjust behaviors, avoid themes sensitive, decreases your own personality to maintain stability. And yet you feel like you are never enough. This is one of the hallmarks of living with a functional psychopath, the feeling permanent inadequacy, because the standard of demands is constantly changing. Today you are praised, tomorrow compared, then ignored. This cycle creates emotional dependence. You try to recover the initial version of the person, the enchanting phase, the intense connection of beginning, and the more you try, the more you distance yourself from yourself. Gaslighting becomes routine. You are exaggerating. That never happened. You always distort things. Over time, you begin to doubt your own memory. In the social circle, they are often charismatic. They know how to tell stories, adapt speech according to the audience. They can be funny in one group and serious in another, empathetic in public and indifferent in private. This duality reinforces invisibility. If you try to warn someone, the response is usually, "He was always so right with me." Because it was. As long as it was functional. Functional psychopaths keep the mask on for decades because they understand a rule essential. Reputation is a shield. They invest in public image, participate in events. They help strategically. They create a social validation network. So when someone finally questions it, there is already a chorus of defense ready. But there is something even more disturbing. They do not live in constant active evil. Many alternate periods of stability genuine with episodes of manipulation. This creates moral confusion in victims. If he was really bad, he wouldn't have done that for me. This ambiguity maintains the bond. From a psychological perspective, psychopathy is on a spectrum. Not all are violent. Not everyone is a criminal. Some are just cold, opportunistic, and incapable of connection deep. But the impact can be devastating. Because prolonged coexistence with someone without real empathy generates silent erosion. You begin to adapt to the other's emptiness, reduces expectations, decreases emotions, control reactions, until one day he realizes that he no longer recognizes his own identity. And the inevitable question arises, how can someone pretend for so long? How do you sustain two such different versions of yourself? And even more disturbing, do they believe in the mask itself? In the next block, we will face the most disturbing question of all. What really differentiates a functional psychopath from any other apparently normal person? And, if psychopathy is a spectrum, where does the adaptation end and the shadow begin? There is a question that runs through everything we have seen so far. What really separates a functional psychopath from anyone else apparently common? The answer is not in violence. It's not in the look, not even in caricatured behavior. It is in silent absence, lack of deep empathy, lack of true guilt, lack of genuine emotional bond. Most people feel internal conflict when hurting someone, even when they make mistakes, carry discomfort, relive the scene. They question decisions. They feel weight. The functional psychopath feels calculation. He can recognize that something is socially reprehensible. You can even apologize. But no, there is real emotional reverberation. The request is strategic. Repair is convenient. Does this mean they are permanent monsters? Not necessarily. And this is where the topic becomes even more disturbing. Psychopathy is not an on-off switch. It's a spectrum. There are levels, intensities, stroke combinations. Some people have high coldness, but they do not manipulate. Others manipulate, but do not systematically destroy. The danger is in the sum: emotional coldness, superficial enchantment, absence of remorse, strategic ability. When these elements meet, someone emerges capable of going through decades without being unmasked. And perhaps the most uncomfortable thing is admitting that psychopathic traits may exist, to a lesser extent. Degree in many people: extreme competitiveness, exaggerated emotional detachment, ability to lie without guilt. Where does adaptation to the modern world end and the shadow begin? We live in a society that values performance over sensitivity, results above bond, efficiency over empathy. In this scenario, cold features can be rewarded. This creates a perfect environment for masks to thrive. But here's the final thought. The scariest thing is not that psychopaths exist. It's just that they don't have to look dangerous. They can be admired, promoted, celebrated, and while you look for obvious signs of threat, the real risk may lie with the person who never changes his tone of voice, the one that always seems too stable, too controlled, too immune. If this content made you think differently about the human mind, sign up. Here we explore what almost no one wants to see. And now I want to ask you a direct question. Have you ever felt like someone around you seemed perfectly normal, but there was something inexplicably empty? Comment on just one word: intuition. Because sometimes, before logic understands, the body already understands. And perhaps the scariest thing is not discovering that they exist, but realizing that, all this time, you've been much closer than imagined.